Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on this Facebook Live to talk about our annual budget. We are going to spend this Facebook Live session walking you through the budgeting process, how that works, and how our priorities align with our strategic plan. We also want to share with you some of the budget priorities that we've already heard from you through our ongoing conversations, surveys, and feedback sessions. Tonight is just a great place to start this conversation with our community. We'll be answering questions live, so you can post those in the chat. But also, we want to continue the conversation with you. And so we've set up in-person sessions that will hold later this month when we get back from spring break to really continue that conversation and go deeper over some of this information. So if we don't get your question tonight, just know that we are capturing everything and we are listening. There will be a survey that will get shared into the chat that you can share, that you can complete as we go tonight or come back to at any time. Great way to share your thoughts, questions, and ideas whenever it's convenient for you. So to get started, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Robertson, our superintendent, who will kick us off with an overview of our strategic plan and how it informs our budget.
Apologize, come off mute. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate the introduction and for getting us started. And for everyone here, thanks for joining us during our first ever Facebook Live event to get feedback on the budget. So hopefully we'll go without many kinks, but I appreciate you joining us. So got a presentation that I think is about to start, and hopefully you can see that on your screen today. Want to make sure that we kind of, as we go to the next slide, look at what really grounds our work and want to frame this conversation around Opportunity 2030, which is the strategic plan that we adopted as a board and administration 2 school years ago, and really helps us set the stage for this conversation around our budget. So we look at kind of the complexity of our district, and in the next slide shows some figures around the number of students we have, number of employees, and really I think it just sets the stage for how complex our district can be. You know, it's nearly 45,000 students, 6,000 employees, nearly 8 million square feet of building space. So a very complex organization. We think about our strategic plan really grounded in that is our just cause. And our just cause, if you can go to the next slide, is that all children will thrive and experience a future without limits. I get asked this question all the time, like, how do you do this? We're never going to get to all children. And that is the point of a just cause, is that this is aspirational. It's something that we're always going to have to reach towards. But also it's something that everyone in this community can connect to. Everyone in this community can do something to help our children thrive and experience a future without limits. When we go to the next slide, we think about our beliefs. Really the one I want to hone in on tonight is this belief that public education is the foundation of our community. And that gets shown in our budget. We need to make sure that in these conversations around budget that we are elevating the importance of public education, not just in Chattanooga, but across the state and certainly across the nation. About a year ago, we started talking about our values. We said that our values are what drive our everyday actions. If you'll go to the next slide, it lists our values. And the bottom 2 values are really the ones that I am thinking about tonight, that we are collaborating. We're here to listen. We're here to learn, to get your ideas about our budget. And then, of course, stewardship. We want to make sure that the resources that the public has entrusted with us, that we are using those efficiently and that they are effectively serving our community. We think about our commitments. These are really what we measure success about. In the next slide, we list all of our commitments. And you notice that every one of these commitments starts with the word every. I would also encourage you to think about each and every. So when we think about students, we're concentrating on each and every student. When we think about our employees, we're concentrating on each and every employee. What we know about this community is that it's very diverse, and the needs across this community vary from one side of the county to the other, from the urban core of the county to the far rural areas of the county. And so we need to make sure that as we're having these conversations, that we're focused on each and every student. Next slide, please. So we're going to go real quickly through these. And when we think about every student learns, what we're trying to do is make sure that we're improving over each academic year. This is achievement, meaning absolute, like how kids score on assessments. But it's also about growth. We want to make sure that kids are all moving forward. And when you ask, what does every student learns? What does that actually mean? If you go to the next slide, it talks about really our commitments here under Every Student Learns, is that we are trying to develop readers, writers, and thinkers, that we're looking at growth in the classroom and also against the state standards. And we're really focused on literacy for our youngest learners. So when we talk about K-2 literacy, that has been a huge focus and one that we're doubling down on as we head into this budget season. On the next slide, we get into Every Student Belongs. And really what we're talking about here is we want to make sure that we create environments in schools where kids know that they're valued and are connected to other students, they're connected to their educators, and they're connected to the community. And when we look at the commitments here on the next slide, we want to be very clear that we want to create a safe and a safe space and a sense of belonging in our schools for every student. We want to make sure that we're improving the relationships that we have between our schools and our families, and that we're continuously focused on student well-being. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago in our State of the System, that the majority of our parents feel really strongly about their schools. Oftentimes, that doesn't translate to the district, and I recognize that. We want you to be really connected to your schools, to have those trusting relationships, while at the same time working to improve the relationship with the district. Next slide, please. Again, we talk about every school equipped. We want to make sure that our facilities are up to date, that our operations are serving kids' needs across this county, and that we're doing that efficiently and effectively. So on the next slide, when we look at this, we have made a commitment to improving our learning environments, to making sure that they are safe, to making sure that they're secure. And we've made a historic investment here. And thanks to the county commission, our county mayor, our school board, just recently a $250 million bond was issued that is going to improve learning environments across this county and will eventually touch every single school in Hamilton County. Next slide, please. Every employee valued is a commitment that we have worked really hard on. We know that we have more work to do here to make sure that our employees feel valued, that they're empowered, that they're connected, and that we're improving the morale of our employees. What we believe is that we really do this in two ways. If we're talking about increasing the satisfaction or the engagement of our employees, that we do this not only through wages, but by pushing more resources directly to schools, which then can improve the working conditions for our teachers. And this is an area that, again, 2 weeks ago at State of the System, as I mentioned, really three things. The very first thing that I mentioned was we are going to continue to push on increasing wages for our employees. Next slide, please. And again, we think about every community served. Again, want to make sure that we realize that we need partners, whether those are family partners, whether those are advocates, whether those are community members, to make sure that each of our students is ready for life beyond K through 12. And we are working extremely hard here to collaborate and to build these partnerships. We have over 250 unique partnerships across this county that provide supports for our schools, provide supports for our families, and supports for our students. Next slide, please. What I often say about this, and we focused a lot on Portrait of a Graduate at our State of the System, but when we do this work well, when we invest well as a community and execute on this plan, these are the type of kids that we graduate. And you'll notice that only one of these indicators is focused on academics, but the other four are focused on what many people call life skills, essential skills, soft skills. But we want to make sure that we are preparing kids that whether they're going straight into the workforce, whether they're going to a 2 or 4 year university, that they have these skills that will serve them well moving forward, whether that's talking about someone being resilient or an effective communicator or solutions oriented. Those are things that we know that each and every student will need as they move forward into adult life. And again, when we think about Opportunity 2030, opportunity happens by design. It is not unintentional. We have to be intentional about our investments. We have to be intentional about our daily actions and our values so that we create opportunity by design and ensure that all children thrive. So when we talk about the budgeting process, what does this look like? I think, if I'm not mistaken, we've got a video. It's about 3 minutes that we'll take a second to look at that kind of explains where funding comes from and how this process works for Hamilton County Schools.
Hi, my name is Kennedy Garrett, and I'm a senior at STEM School Chattanooga. I'm here to explain how the Hamilton County Schools budgeting process works. I know that might not sound too exciting, but ultimately, school budgets are about me. How my school is funded affects me, my peers, and the teachers, staff, and family members who support my learning and well-being. So it's important to understand. First things first, let's talk dollars. Approximately half of this budget comes from our local Hamilton County government through property and sales tax revenue. The remaining amount comes almost entirely from the Tennessee Department of Education, though a small portion of this does come from other funding streams. How much money our district gets from the state of Tennessee is mostly based on the number of students we have. The more students, the more funding. But it's a bit more complicated than it sounds. With the implementation of the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, or TISA for short, starting with the 2023-2024 school year, funding from the state will look a little different than it has in the past. Our district will receive a base funding amount for each student. Then additional funds will be provided depending on each individual student's needs, such as the number of students with economic need or unique learning needs. Now that we have an idea of how much money our district receives, it's time to determine how that money is budgeted and allocated to support our students and schools. Hamilton County Schools funds 81 different school buildings in our community and serves just under 45,000 students. We know each school is different, so how do we determine how much funding each school gets? Similar to the TISA model that we just discussed, this school year, Hamilton County Schools will be funding each of our schools through a student-based budgeting model. Our model allocates a set number of school positions based on the number of students enrolled in the school. These positions include teachers, principals, school counselors, nurses, and all of the employees that make a school building run. On top of the base positions, schools receive a specific dollar amount per student, and that number then increases based on student needs. Each school can use these supplemental dollars to hire additional staff and fund other student support initiatives to meet the personalized needs of their students and school community. This school-based staffing alone represents close to 65% of our expected operating budget. Remember, now that we've staffed our schools and accounted for our mandatory operational expenses, we still have about 15% of our budget left to allocate. How do we determine where these dollars are spent? This part is where you come in. Each year, we host budgeting planning meetings and invite community members and stakeholders to help identify priorities. These priorities can include high-quality instructional materials, student and staff technology, professional development opportunities, and enhanced learning opportunities for students, such as summer programming, future-ready institutes, and more. It's important that we work together to determine how Hamilton County Schools can best serve our students and families while being an excellent steward of our community's resources. After HCS has received school budget requests and has worked with our community members to set district funding priorities, HCS presents our operating budget proposal to the school board. If approved, it will then be sent to the Hamilton County Commission, the legislative body that serves as the final vote on our district's budget. Join us at the budget planning meeting this year to be a part of the process. You can head to our website to learn more about the specific dates, times, and locations. We look forward to working with each of you to create opportunities by design so that all HCS students can thrive and experience a future without limits.
Drop for how we are funded, and we're going to kind of get into a little bit of how this process works. One of the things I often get asked is how do we get input? And we've been getting input for the last at least 2 budget cycles on basically an ongoing basis, not just waiting for these meetings. And so some of the priorities that have come from the community through surveys, through small group meetings and things like that are listed here below. You see under Every Student Learns, priorities around gap closure and intervention, the K through literacy. One of the big ones that we always hear about is sustaining our adult to teacher ratio, which right now is consistently somewhere around 1 to 10, 1 to 11. Under Every Student Belongs, a huge push over the last few years around well-being supports, but also what we believe connects kids the most, which is oftentimes our arts education or our athletic and extracurricular activities. Again, Every School Equipped, safe and secure schools comes up quite a bit and is one that we have invested a lot of time over the past couple of budget cycles, and that obviously will continue as we move forward. And then Every Employee Valued, supports around not just sustaining wages, but also improving working conditions. When we look at these priorities across several different groups, you'll see it in this slide that we've done work with the school board through a retreat, our extended senior leadership team, our teachers cabinet, the parent pulse check, the staff pulse check. And so you see that these same themes continue to come up across these groups. One thing that I want to note here is you may be wondering, safe and secure schools is number one for school board, SLT, teachers cabinet, but it doesn't even make the list for parents pulse check and for staff pulse check. That's because we haven't asked this question yet this year on the pulse checks. What I would fully expect in the next, I think it's next week or so that we send out that pulse check, that you'll see safe and secure schools, if not number one, at least in the top two for parents and for staff as well. But again, what is helpful here is that we do see a lot of consistency. For example, you see K through literacy in the top three for school board, SLT, teachers cabinet, and for parents coming in at number 5. You see things like sustaining the adult teacher ratio coming in across the board for multiple groups, teachers, parents, and staff. And so this is very helpful for us as we start to frame our approach to the budget and making sure that we're getting multiple cycles of input from many groups as we move forward. Next slide, please. So what is our timeline? Right now, we're in the middle of March. This is our Facebook Live virtual meeting, which we committed to doing between March 1st and 31st. There are multiple more opportunities that the board will engage in this through agenda and regular sessions, as well as board finance committee sessions. We are aiming for May 8th as the date that the board will vote on this budget. We expect the first week of April to have the what I like to say is kind of the 80 to 90% cooked budget. It's a big budget book that goes to the school board and gives them about a month to really work through it, make any adjustments before they approve it. And as you heard in the video from there, goes to the county commission for their approval. Between that April and May date, just for context, we had 3 different versions of the budget. So a lot of movement happens in that last month to get a budget that we feel like we have consensus on the board to approve. Ultimately, we'd love to get an 11-0 vote, but we definitely want to make sure that we have a large consensus of the board that is confident in voting for that final budget that then will get sent to the county commission. We expect the county commission to vote on it sometime later in May. Last year, that did move a little bit into June, but we're hopeful it will be voted on and finished by the end of May. Next slide. So we think about budget planning for FY26. Some things that are on our mind, and I think it's important for you to know, and it's important for us to have this context as we talk about where we are in this budget. I've said multiple times that this is going to be a difficult budget, and oftentimes people say, "Why is it going to be difficult?" Really 2 reasons. Right now, we are seeing revenue growth is slowing. specifically in places like property tax and sales tax. A couple of years ago, we had a year where sales tax increased almost 13% from one year to the next. This year, we are projecting about a 2% increase. And so that growth is slowing. And as you see in our economy, that's not unexpected, right? On top of slowing revenue, we are seeing cost increases, contractual costs. So we have several contracts that have built-in escalators, whether that is our custodial contract, whether that is our transportation contract, that have increases that is kind of part of doing business that automatically go into effect. We have seen a huge increase in healthcare costs. And we shared a slide with the board last night that across the country over the last 4 years, average healthcare costs have increased by about 40%. We're not immune to that. Ours have not increased quite that much, about 30 to 31%. But it's because we've invested in things like our healthcare clinics and our pharmacies that reduce our cost. And as more and more employees utilize those services, those costs will continue to hopefully level off and not increase at the rate that they are across the country. So when we think about how we build a budget around our strategic plan. We need to make sure that the priorities in our strategic plan are funded. And what we've said multiple times is that when we invest well, outcomes improve. And we do this really on a student-based staffing model. And you heard that in the video where we have a base model that is simply based on the number of kids that come into a school. That includes things that we believe every school needs to have to operate: principals, teachers, front office staff. Sorry, when you don't move in here, the light turns off. Front office staff, but it also includes things like special ed teachers. And I want to kind of stick a pin in this right here because there's been some noise around special ed and how we're funding that. And I want to make sure that I'm very clear here because there's some misinformation about positions and what is happening there. So we are still funding exceptional ed positions in our base model. What we've done the last 2 years is basically fund one teacher and one assistant to every 20 students that have an IEP. Didn't matter how many hours of service they got. If they got 2 hours or if they got 28 hours, we funded one teacher and one assistant. What we saw in the last 2 years is that stretching out those resources in that manner was not serving our kids well. There is a very big difference between the needs of a student that gets 25 hours of service and the needs of a student that gets 6 hours of service. So what we have done is kind of gone a little bit back to making sure that our resources are used efficiently and effectively. And what I mean by that is in our model this year, our base distinguishes between students that are getting between 1 to 8 hours of service, where we are staffing that at 1 to 20. So one teacher to every 20 students. Students that get 9 to 21 hours, it may be 22, but 9 to 21, 22 hours, we're staffing that at one teacher to one assistant. What we have done is students that are getting more services than that, we have we have pulled those resources into our programs pot. So those positions are not showing up in the base model. And I think this is where some of the concern and miscommunication has happened. So in the programs, we are funding 70 additional exceptional ed programs. This can be anywhere from an IDS classroom to a multiple exceptionalities classroom to a COM classroom. And we have 70 of those programs across the county. That equates to 70 teachers and 101 assistants. So when you add it up, we are funding 298 special ed teachers in this version of the staffing model. For context, that 298 number is 4 less than what we funded last year. All right, so this year, funding 298 in the base model and our programs model. Last year, we funded 302. So it's 4 teachers less than what we funded last year. And again, the purpose of our staffing model, not only in the base, but also in the strategic model where we fund it based on student needs, is to allow schools the flexibility to make decisions around what their schools need. Some might make a decision around putting extra academic supports in place. Some may decide to invest in additional assistance or behavior supports. But we want to balance this idea of having consistency and coherence across the district and allowing flexibility for our schools to address their unique needs. Go to the next slide for me. So when you think about our budget, and you heard in the video, which is just a tad bit out to date, but it's still pretty close. We're funded almost at 50-50 from the state funding, which is TISA, and then local funding around property tax and sales tax. About 27% from property tax, 22% from sales tax, and then about 48% from TISA. The other includes some smaller things, self-funded federal programs, things of that nature. But again, pretty even spread across local taxes and state taxes. So what does our budget look like in terms of expenditures? On most budgets, about 75% of our budget is made up of salaries and benefits. Salaries of our staff that are in schools and salaries of our staff that are providing support services. Only about 25% of our budget is made up of other expenses. And I think this is a really important point to make, because as we consider how we bring a budget that is palatable for our county commission and for our school board, we don't have as much wiggle room as some people might think, without touching our teachers, without touching our leaders, our support staff. Again, 75% is made up of people. If you look at the next slide, what we're trying to show here, and I know that some of the font is a little bit small, but in the 25% of other charges, we've tried to break this up into the dark blue, which are mandated charges, meaning we cannot move that money. For example, charter school transfers. We send about $38 million a year to our charter schools. The smaller number, about $8 million, is our trustee commissions, our legal services, our insurance. The kind of lighter blue color are funds that we could move, but are a little bit harder to move. So a good example of this is our contracted services. We just went through a custodial RFP. We pressed really hard, and our team did a good job to make sure that we could get the most competitive number that we could. We can influence that a little bit, but making huge inroads there can be difficult. The green color, the line color, are areas that a little bit easier for us to move. Those are things like instructional resources, maintenance and repairs, and then a small number that kind of falls into a category of other uses. Next slide, please. I put this slide in here because I think it's important to understand the history of our staffing. I know that last year there were a lot of people talking about how we had increased staffing significantly, and there's often this misconception that the majority of that staff is outside of schools or in what many people call central office, we call central operations. You see a big jump from FY23 to FY24. So the top number, that kind of navy color, is our student enrollment, which has remained relatively steady over the last 4 budgets. The lighter blue line is our overall staff. So the total number of staff that we have. And you see a noticeable jump between FY23 and FY24, which was the year that we implemented this new staffing model. So not only did we push more resources directly to schools, but we also gave them the flexibility to decide how to spend that money. And the vast majority of them invested in people. And so you saw an increase of over 500 employees between FY23 and FY24. The green line is the school-based staff, which makes up about 92% of our entire staff. All the people in the county, 92% of them are in schools. Central operations makes up about 8%. So right now, in this budget, current budget, FY25, we have 5,125 total employees. Just over 4,700 of those are in schools, and 417 of them are in central operations. Go back one slide, sorry. I want to take a second to put a pin in this because a lot of questions come up about classroom sizes, teacher ratios. These are the average classroom sizes and adult to student ratios for this current fiscal year. In our base model, for example, even though we staff high schools at 1 to 32, that doesn't include our CTE programs, and it doesn't include where schools have invested in additional teachers. So you see that number is actually 1 to 25. But our adult to student ratio at high schools is 1 to 11. And that includes, our counselors, our college and career advisors, our assistant principals, our assistants, our front office staff, which we feel like are very important in terms of running schools. When you look at the reduction of what we're talking about in FY26, all the school-based staff in the staffing model, this includes career and technical teacher, it can include a principal reduction of 1, can include teachers, it can include all those positions in the staffing model. So in total, it's about just over 88 positions. And to be clear here, only 33 of those are teaching positions. And we get asked, well, why is that happening? As we look at projections in 2020-21, we saw a huge influx of students. It's the largest influx that we've had in a very long time, partly because we were open more than most people during that first full year of COVID. We do our projections on an average. And so that large year over the past 3 budgets has created a larger projection than we've actually seen coming to schools. So this past year in FY25, we projected over 1,100 students more than actually showed up in schools. And so we've overstaffed schools this past year. And now we see that projection kind of coming back closer in line with what we expect to actually show up in classrooms. To be clear, of those 33 people, we do not expect anyone to lose a job. We, through attrition, retirements, things of that nature, hire, anywhere from 300 to 350 teachers every year, right? And so that number will be held or will be consumed through attrition, through retirements, and things of that nature. What we believe is that if we're seeing a reduction in staff at the school level, that we need to also see a reduction of staff in centralized operations. And we are committed to doing that, looking to reduce central operations by at least 20 positions, which would be a 5% decrease compared to a 2% decrease at the school level. All right, next slide. So we're about to get into questions, but before we do that, I want to make sure that we understand what priority-based budgeting is. We always get the questions like, why don't you do zero-based budgeting? For school systems, especially K through 12, the industry standard is priority-based budgeting, meaning regardless of where the revenue is coming from, our operating revenue, our self-funded state grants, federal, that all of those dollars have to go towards one of our commitments. And we have to be very clear about which commitment that is. And we committed to priority-based budgeting a little over 5 years ago, and this administration and this school board still believe that it's our best path forward as we consider budget. Before we open it up to questions, I want to once again be clear that this is the start of our budget. We still have a long way to go before we get to a finalized budget. Your input is really important. This won't be the only opportunity for you to provide input, but we are glad that you joined us and looking forward to engaging with you more. Kate, I'm not sure if we've got questions or where we're going from here.
Yes, we've got a couple questions in the chat. So I think we addressed some of these questions specific to ex-ed funding. We had a question about tax revenue increases with new construction homes and if that affects anything.
Yeah, it's a really good, that's a great question. And it's very complicated. And the reason I say it's complicated is because you feel like we've got new construction and that you're seeing a lot of houses being built. Well, then why would property tax be leveling out? What happens every 4 years is we go through an appraisal period. So right now, this is an appraisal year. Some of you may have actually gotten your appraisals already. What happens in appraisal is, especially here in Chattanooga, we've seen the property values go up at a really high rate, some as high as 50 to 60%. You are taxed based on a appraised value, a percentage of your appraised value, and what sets that is what's called the millage rate. On an appraisal year, that millage rate gets lowered to basically equal out the property tax revenue similar to what it was in previous years. And so all those new homes that are being built are basically allowing us to level out what all of us are paying so that we're not paying 50% more than we were in the previous years. That millage rate right now sits around somewhere around 2.3 something. It's likely to go down maybe as far as 1.5 this year. I also want to be transparent with you. In the past, I've pushed on this really hard, and I'm going to continue to push on it. Right now, we get about 43% of 43 cents on every dollar of property tax. At the height, we used to get 54% of that. Our millage rate right now, 2.37, whatever it is the lowest millage rate in the history of Hamilton County. And so I've continued to push on this. It is my job to. I'm not going to apologize for it. We believe that when we get resources and we have data to show it, that when we get resources and we invest effectively, that our outcomes improve. And for us to continue to improve, we need more resources.
Great. We had some comments with folks joining us just a little bit later. Can we revisit the conversation around ex-ed funding?
Yeah. So what I was talking about earlier is there's been a lot of noise around ex-ed and some concerns about cutting of ex-ed staff. And what I was pointing out is an adjustment that we've made to the staffing model this year. And so the past 2 years, we've funded ex-ed regardless of the service hours of kids. So if a kid got 2 service hours per week or 28 service hours per week, we were funding every school at 1 teacher and 1 assistant to every 20 kids. That's created a lot of difficulty for us to serve kids appropriately and to provide the supports that they need to be successful. We feel like we maybe went a little bit too far there, right? And so what we adjusted in the staffing model this year is that we started looking at service hours. And this is actually how the state funds us for exceptional ed. And so we're looking, and I might have the hours off by just an hour or two, so don't get caught up in that, and I apologize if it's off. But we're looking at students that get 1 to 8 hours of service per week. We are funding that at 1 teacher to every 20 kids. Students that are getting 9 to 21 hours of service every week, we're funding those students at 1 teacher and 1 assistant to every 20 students. What we know is that, there's a big difference in needs between a student that gets 18 hours and a student that gets 2 hours. For those students that are getting 23 hours or above, we did not put that in the staffing model. We pulled it over into our programs model. And so we are funding 70 programs across the county at the rate of 70 teachers. And so these programs could be an IDS classroom. It could be an ME classroom, a COM classroom, but we have 70 of these exceptional ed programs across the county. That's going to take 70 teachers. So if you look at the number of teachers in the staffing model for FY25, we had 302 teachers. In this year's model, we have 298. So it's a difference of 4 teachers that is mostly driven by the number of students. And so I know I've heard a lot of narrative around we're cutting exceptional ed teachers. I think what happened and what we're trying to correct now was just in a meeting with our teachers cabinet, and this came up there, is that we've got to do a better job of communicating this, and we've got to get out in front of this a little bit more. We were a little bit deliberate in getting the messaging out, and I think that has created some of the confusion, but we're working to correct that and make sure that we address those concerns. But to be clear, last year to this year, the difference in exceptional ed teachers is 4.
I'm going to have this slide up too, as you all can follow along and input questions just as we go along, because I'm not sure we're going to have time to get to every single question. I saw one question on here about pre-K. Have we talked about pre-K funding?
We have not, but I would love to.
Great.
Are we talking about, was it exceptional ed pre-K?
Yes, let me find that one. Hold on just a second.
So we've been working with our state legislatures on special ed pre-K. And the state funds it, but it does not fund it fully. So we spend somewhere between around $1.5 million. I might be off a little bit there, but somewhere around $1.5 million more for special ed pre-K than what the state provides. And we've elevated that to make sure that our legislators know it, to hopefully support additional funding for those special ed pre-K classrooms. We're also looking to expand options for, regular ed pre-K. We're firm believers in providing that space. And I know that Dr. Stewart, I think she joined us. I'm not sure if she can hear me, but she would be able to answer this question a lot better than I could in terms of like the results that we're seeing from our pre-K classrooms this year. And we've actually filled all those seats this year, which is the first time in a very long time that we've done it.
Okay, and then a question here about, while we're on that, what about gen ed pre-K?
Yeah, that's what I was just talking. We filled all the seats that we have, and we would love to expand it. And what that requires obviously is either grants to fund that, partnerships with other groups. The city, is a great partner with us in pre-K space. And we're definitely trying to expand those options. We've even had some schools kind of on their own talking about paid pre-K classrooms, and where we have space, we're open to those conversations.
Great, thank you. There's some additional questions about the cuts around exceptional education discussion we were just having, like specifically where those cuts will be anticipated.
I would assume when they say specifically like what schools, and we sent out the last staffing model to schools on March 1st. And what you're seeing on there, you will see the base model, which will show the number of exceptional ed teachers and assistants for those kids that are getting 1 to 21 hours of service. And then down below it, what we added were the programs. So what programs schools would get. And so schools know those by the schools. But again, I would not describe these as cuts. We're talking about 4 teachers, and those 4 teachers are really driven by the number of kids, not by the change in the staffing model.
Thanks for clarifying that. Also, some questions about staffing. So can you tell us about how central office staff impacts the adult to student ratio? Maybe some example of those roles and how.
Central office, again, central operations, what we call it, but central office doesn't impact the student to adult ratio. That is simply looking at the number of adults in a building and comparing that to the number of students. So you'll see a range like that 1 to 10, 1 to 11 is not at every school. You might have a school that's at 1 to 13, 1 to 14 because they've chosen to maybe invest in less people and in other things. And then you may see some schools that are even a little bit lower of that because they chose to invest their strategic funds in only people.
Okay. Yeah, I think most of these questions are getting towards the same conversation that we were just having, as some folks may have joined later. How about supports for schools for hiring counselors? That might be helpful to talk about, just the supports that are going on in the schools.
Yeah. Our base model provides counselors, social workers, and student support coaches. We believe these are essential and connect directly with the strategic plan that we have in place. We're committed to those positions. There are some conversations, right, about should principals have flexibility on choosing those positions or not. And I've been clear with our board about this. You can see it in the conversation we had at budget committee meeting last night, is that I firmly believe that those are essential positions that should be in every school. And in order for us to execute on our commitment of every student belongs, those positions serve very different roles for students and for teachers, right? They're not all just student facing. The student support coaches interact with both teachers and with students. The function of a counselor is very different than the function of a social worker. And so we're committed to those positions. I'm sure there will be ongoing conversations. I think it's a great place. Your feedback on this survey, regardless of which way you fall, it's a great place for you to provide feedback, because this feedback doesn't only go to the administration, but it also goes to the school board.
Great. Thank you. And I know we are getting at time, so I do want to go to the next slide and just make sure, as you guys, we said early on, this is a continuing conversation and we want your engagement. These are great questions as we go through here. So as you mentioned, the school board meeting, you can stream those on our YouTube page just to keep up to date with all that's going on and the conversations happening. We're going to put that link to our YouTube page where they're streamed. All of the meetings are streamed live for you to watch or on demand. And then then the in-person community budget meetings, where I think we can dive in deeper to some of the conversations that we are seeing in the chat and be able to answer those questions there. We will have interpreters available at these community budget meetings and send out details regarding locations very soon. So hopefully an opportunity to reconnect with you all when we get back from spring break. And then just once again, make sure that you have the survey available. Help us think through the priorities, especially what we're missing, other additions or comments that you all have. And just want to thank you all so much for your time tonight. And I'll just, Dr. Robertson, if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, number one, again, thanks for joining us. And I want to be clear, it often comes across, I think, that we're simply asking here locally for more money and that the only way is to go to your school board or county commissioner. There are some ways at the state that you can help us to ensure that we're funding schools appropriately by reaching out to your state representative or state senator. And we've had these conversations with them. So I don't want you to think that I'm saying something here that I haven't already put in front of them. But a good example of this is the state started a grant last year to ensure that we can put an SRD or a school resource officer in every school. There's a grant that's over $100 million that not even half of it got used last year to fund SRDs. We made a decision 3 years ago before this grant to put either an SSO or an SRD in every single building. And so right now, that grant does not pay for our SSOs. It pays for our SRDs. And so in our budget, we're spending millions of dollars here locally to ensure that every building has either an SSO or an SRD. The money's sitting there, right? And so we've encouraged our state legislatures to change the rules there to allow SSOs. They go through training. They have to be, obviously go through the training to carry a weapon, go through the similar training to what SRDs. The majority of them are either past law enforcement officers, ex-military, well-trained individuals. And that's a good example of a way that you can help us advocate here locally by reaching out to them. So please do that. Please advocate at the state level to provide the funding that's already there for things like exceptional ed pre-K or our SSOs in that school safety grant. But also continue to tell the stories of the good things that your schools are doing. As I said earlier, majority of our parents really value and are satisfied with their school. We recognize that doesn't often translate to the district, but I want to hear you I want you to hear me say that what we are focused on is pushing as many resources directly to schools so that we can serve kids and serve our teachers. And we're going to continue to press for that, continue to advocate for it as we go there. I appreciate, again, you being here. Kate, just want to check last time, anything new before we say goodnight?
No, we'll also, I see a couple questions. We'll make sure to get in there and respond back to you.
I got a text from somebody saying readdress gen ed positions, but I don't know what that means. I'm assuming maybe it means the 33 positions that I mentioned in the staffing model that are a result of, again, the declining projection. I don't know if it's that, but just to reiterate it, what I said is our projections are based on a 4-year average. And in 2020, 2021, we had a really high number, which has kind of elevated our projections the last few years. That is falling off in this year's projections, which means the actual number of students coming and what we project is going to be closer together. This year, what we projected compared to the number of students that we had was 1,100 more, right? We projected 1,100 more than what actually showed up, which meant that we were staffing schools at a much higher rate than we should have. This year, because that falls off, the projection is going to be closer to the number of students that we have, which means that you're going to see 33 less teachers across the county. But again, that'll be taken care of in attrition, retirements, things of that nature. Don't want any teacher across Hamilton County to hear me say that anyone's losing their job. That doesn't mean anyone's losing their job. So I'm not sure if that's what it was, but I saw that text and wanted to make sure to put it out there.
Great. Well, thank you all again. Again, please join us for continuing the conversation, and appreciate your time tonight.